The Little Book of Eternal Wisdom, Part 3. Chapter 10. The Third Thing. Why God Permits His Friends to Suffer So Much Temporal Suffering. The Servant. Another thing, Lord, I have at my heart. May I venture to tell it to Thee? May I indeed venture to dispute with Thee like the holy Jeremiah? Gentle Lord, be not angry, but listen patiently to me. Lord, people say as follows, that how sweet soever Thy love may be, Thou dost yet allow it to prove very harsh to Thy friends in the many severe trials which Thou sendest them, such as worldly scorn and much adversity, both inwardly and outwardly. Scarcely is anyone, say they, admitted to Thy friendship, but he has forthwith to gather up his courage for suffering. Lord, by all goodness, what sweetness can they have in all this? Or how canst Thou permit it in Thy friends? Or art Thou pleased not to know anything about it? Eternal Wisdom. Even as my Father loves me, so do I love my friends. I do to my friends now as I have done from the beginning of the world. The Servant. This is what they complain of, and therefore they say, Thou hast so few friends because Thou allowest them to prosper in this world so very sorrowly. Lord, on this account there are also indeed many who, when they gain Thy friendship and ought to prove constant in suffering, fall off from Thee, and, woe is me that I must say it in the sorrow of my heart and with bitter tears, relapse to that state which, through Thee, they have forsaken. O my Lord, what hast Thou to say to this? Eternal Wisdom. This is the complaint of persons of a sick faith and of small works, of a lukewarm life, an undisciplined spirit. But Thou, beloved soul, up with thy mind, out of the slime and deep slough of carnal delights, unlock thy interior sense, open thy spiritual eyes and see. Mark well what thou art, where thou art, and whither thou dost belong. For then shalt thou understand what I do, the very best for my friends. According to thy natural essence, thou art a mirror of the divinity. Thou art an image of the Trinity, and a copy of eternity. For as I, in my eternal uncreated entity, am the good which is infinite, so art thou according to thy desires, fathomless, and as little as a small drop can yield in the vast depth of the sea, just so little can all that this world is able to afford contribute to the fulfillment of thy desires. Thus, then, art thou in this wretched valley of tears, where joy and sorrow, laughing and weeping, mirth and sadness, are mingled together, where no heart ever obtained perfect happiness, for it is false and deceitful, more than I will tell thee. It promises much and performs little. It is short, uncertain, and changeable. Today much joy, tomorrow a heart full of woe. Behold, such is the disport of the scene of time. Chapter 11. On the everlasting pains of hell. Eternal Wisdom. O my chosen one, now look from the very bottom of thy heart to this lamentable misery. Where are now all those who heretofore sat down amidst this temporal scene, with tranquillity and pleasure, with tenderness and comfort of body? What avails them all the joys of this world, which are as soon vanquished on the wings of swift time, as though they had never been? How quickly over is that carnal love, for which pain must be eternally endured! O ye senseless fools! Where is now that ye so gaily uttered, Hail, ye children of jollity! Let us give furlough to sorrow, let us cherish the fullness of joy. What avail now all the pleasures ye ever obtained? Well may ye cry aloud with a sorrowful voice, Woe upon us that ever we were born into this world! How has swift time deceived us? How has death stolen upon us? Is there any one still upon the earth who could be more deceived than we have been deceived? Or is there any one willing to take counsel from the calamity of others? If any one were to have all the sufferings of all mankind for 1,000 years, it would only be as a moment against this. How very happy is that man who has never sought after pleasures displeasing to God, who for his sake has renounced all temporal delights. We foolish ones, we deemed such men forsaken and forgotten of God. But see how he has embraced them in eternity with such marks of honor before all the heavenly host. What harm can all their sufferings and disgraces now do them, which have turned out so much to their joy? Meanwhile, all that we so entirely loved, how is it vanished? Ah, misery on misery, and it must last forever. Oh, forever and ever, what art thou? Oh, end without end? Oh, dying above all dying, to be dying every hour, and yet never to die. O Father and Mother, and all that ye ever held dear, God bless you forever and ever, for we shall never see you and love you again. We must ever be separated from you. O separation! O everlasting separation! How grievous thou art! O wringing of hands! O fretting, sobbing, and weeping! O shrieking and howling forever, and yet never to be heard! Nothing but sorrow and distress must our wretched eyes behold, our ears to be filled with nothing. But, alas, nothing but woe is me. O all hearts, let our lamentable forever and ever move your compassion. Let our miserable forever pierce to your core. O ye mountains and valleys, why do ye wait for us? Why do ye keep us so long? Why do ye bear with us? Why do ye not bury us from the lamentable sight? O sufferings of that world and sufferings of this world, how very different ye are! O time present, how blinding, how deceiving thou art, that we should not have foreseen this in the blooming days of our youth, which we wasted so luxuriously, which will never more return. Oh, that we had but one little hour of all those vanished years! Yet this is denied by God's justice, and without any hope for us, ever must be denied. Oh, suffering and distress and misery in this forgotten land, where we must be separated from all that is dear, without solace or hope, forever and ever. Nothing else would we desire than that if there was a millstone as broad as the whole earth, and in circumference so large that it everywhere touched the heavens, and that if there came a little bird every 100,000 years, and took from the stone as much as a 10th part of a grain of millet, so as in 100,000 years to peck away from the stone as much as an entire grain of millet, we unfortunates would desire nothing more than that, when the stone came to an end, our torments too might terminate, and yet even this cannot be. Behold, such is the song of woe which succeeds the joys of this world. The servant. O, thou severe judge, how terrified are the depths of my heart! How powerless sinks my soul beneath the load of sorrow and compassion for those unhappy spirits! Who is there in the world that hears this, and is not so insane as not to tremble at such fearful distress? O thou, my only love, forsake me not. O thou, my only chosen consolation, do not thus separate from me. Sooner than be thus separated from thee, my only love, forever and ever. I will say nothing of the rest. O misery of misery! I would prefer to be tormented 1,000 times a day. When I but think of such a separation, my heart for anguish is like to break. Yes, tender Father, do with me here what thou wilt. Thou hast my free consent, but oh, deliver me from this woeful separation, for I could by no means endure it. Eternal wisdom. Cast away thy fear. That which is united in time remains undivided in eternity. The servant. O Lord, would that all men heard this, who still consume their days so foolishly, so that they might become wise, and might reform their lives, before these things should overtake them. O ye senseless, obdurate men, how long will ye protract your foolish, sinful lives? Be converted to God, and shield yourselves against this wretched misery and lamentation of eternal woe. Chapter 12. On the Immeasurable Joys of Heaven. Eternal wisdom. Now lift up thy eyes and see where thou dost belong. Thou dost belong to the fatherland of the celestial paradise. Thou art here as a stranger guest, a miserable pilgrim. Therefore, as a pilgrim hastens back to his home where his dear friends expect him, and wait for him with great longing, so shouldst thou desire to hasten back to thy fatherland, where all will be glad to see thee, where all long so ardently for thy joyous presence, that they may greet thee tenderly, and unite thee to their blessed society forever. And didst thou but know how they thirst after thee, how they desire that thou shouldst combat devoutly in suffering, and behave chivalrously in all adversity, even such as they have overcome, and how they now with great sweetness remember the cruel years through which they once passed. Truly, all suffering would only be the easier to thee, for the more bitterly thou shalt have suffered, the more honorably wilt thou be received. Oh, then, how pleasant will honor be! What joy will then pervade thy heart and mind when thy soul shall be so honorably praised, commended, and extolled by me before my Father and all the heavenly host, because she has suffered so much, and fought against and overcome so much in this scene of temporal strife, in whose fullness of reward many a one who has never known affliction will have no participation. How brightly Will not then the crown shine that here below is gained with such bitterness? How exquisitely beautiful will not the wounds and marks glitter, which here below are received from my love? So welcome wilt thou be made in thy fatherland, that the greatest stranger to thee of all is the countless hosts will love thee more ardently and faithfully than any father or mother ever loved the child of their bosom in this scene of time. The servant. O Lord, through thy goodness, dare I hope that thou wilt tell me yet more about my fatherland, so that I may long for it all the more, and may suffer every affliction the more cheerfully? Yes, my Lord, what manner of place is my fatherland? Or what do people do there? Or are there very many people there? Or do they really know as well what takes place with us on earth as thy words declare? Eternal wisdom. Now, then, ascend thou on high with me. I will carry thee thither in spirit, and will give thee, after a rude similitude, a distant glimpse into the future. Behold, above the ninth heaven, which is incalculably more than 100,000 times larger than the entire earth, there is another heaven which is called the Caelum Empyreum, the fiery heaven. So called, not from the fire, but from the immeasurably transparent brightness, which is immovable and unchangeable in its nature. And this is the glorious court in which the heavenly hosts dwell, where the morning star with the rest praises me, and all the children of God rejoice. There stand, encompassed with inconceivable light, the everlasting thrones, from which the evil spirits were hurled, in which the elect were seated. See how the delightful city shines with beaten gold, how it glitters with costly jewels, inlaid with precious stones, transparent as crystal, reflecting red roses, white lilies, and all living flowers. Now, look on the beautiful heavenly fields themselves. Lo, here are the delights of summer, here sunny meads of May, where the very valley of bliss. Here the glad moments are seen flitting from joy to joy. Here harps and viols, here singing and leaping and dancing hand in hand forever. Here the gratification of every desire, here pleasure without pain and everlasting security. Now, look how the countless multitude drink to their heart's desire at the living fountains of gushing water. Look how they feast their eyes on the pure, clear mirror of the revealed divinity, in which all things are made plain and evident to them. Steal a little nearer, and mark how the sweet queen of the celestial kingdom, whom thou lovest with so much ardor, soars aloft in dignity and joy over the whole celestial host, inclined tenderly on her beloved, encircled with red rose flowers and lilies of the valley. See how her ravishing beauty fills with delight and wonder all the heavenly choirs. Oh, now behold what will rejoice thy heart and soul, and see how the Mother of Compassion has turned her compassionate eyes towards thee and all sinners, and how powerfully she appeals to her beloved Son, and intercedes with him. Now, turn round with the eyes of thy pure understanding, and behold also how the high seraphim and the love-abounding souls of the seraphic choirs blaze up perpetually in me, and how the bright company of the cherubim have a bright infusion and effusion of my eternal inconceivable light. how the high thrones and hosts enjoy in me a sweet repose, and I in them. Then see how the triplicity of the other hosts, the lordships, powers, and dominations, regularly fulfill my beautiful and eternal order in the universality of nature. Mark, too, how the third host of angelic spirits executes my high messages and decrees in the particular parts of the world, and see how lovingly, how joyfully and variously the multitude is marshaled, and what a beautiful sight it is. Turn next thy glance and see how my chosen disciples and best beloved friends sit in repose and honor upon their awful judgment seats, how the martyrs glitter in their rose-colored garments, the confessors shine in their vernal beauty, how refulgent the virgins appear in their angelic purity, how all the heavenly host overflows with divine sweetness. Oh, what a company! What a joyous band! Blessed, thrice blessed, is he who is born to dwell where they dwell. Lo, to this very fatherland I shall carry home from misery and tribulation, arrayed in all the richness of her rich morning gift, my beloved bride in my arms. I shall adorn her interiorly with the beautiful garment of the eternal light of that glory, which will exalt her above all her natural powers. She will be clothed exteriorly with the glorified body, which is 7 times brighter than the sun's light, swift, subtle, and to suffering impassive. Then I shall put her on the crown of delight, and on the crown of a golden garland. The servant. Gentle Lord, what is the morning gift, and what is the crown and golden garland? Eternal wisdom. The morning gift is a clear vision of that which here below thou dost merely believe in, an actual comprehending of that which now thou hopest for, and a far heartfelt pleasant enjoyment of that which on earth thou lovest. As to the beautiful crown, it is essential reward, but the blooming garland is accidental reward. The servant. Lord, what is that? Eternal wisdom. Accidental reward consists in such particular delight as souls obtain by a particular and meritorious works, wherewith they have conquered here below, even as the souls of great doctors, steadfast martyrs, and pure virgins. But essential reward consists in the contemplative union of the soul with the pure divinity, for rest she never can till she born above all her powers and capabilities, and introduced to the natural entity of the persons, and to the clear vision of their real essence. And in the emanation of the splendor of their essence, she will find full and perfect satisfaction and everlasting happiness. And the more disengaged and abstracted the self-egression of such souls is, the more free will be their soaring exaltation, and the more free their exaltation, the deeper will be their penetration into the vast wilderness and unfathomable abyss of the unknown Godhead, wherein they are immersed, overflowed, and blended up, so that they desire to have no other will than God's will, and that they become the very same that God is. In other words, that they are made blessed by grace as he is by nature. Raise then thy countenance joyfully. Forget for a while all thy tribulations. Comfort thy heart in this dark silent scene with the secret vision which thou now enjoyest of the society of the blessed, And behold how blooming and fair those faces appear which here on earth were so often red with shame for my sake. Lift up thy glad heart, and speak as follows. Where now is that bitter shame which so cruelly pierced your pure hearts? Where now the bowed heads, the cast-down eyes? Where the suppressed sorrow of heart, the deep sighs and bitter tears? Where the pale looks, the dire poverty and manifold infirmities? Where is now the miserable voice thus speaking, Alas, my Lord and my God, how sad at heart I am? Where are all those now who so greatly oppressed and despised you? No more are heard such words as these. Ho, for the combat! Ho, for the strife! Be ready day and night, like one who fights against the heathen. Where is now what you were wont, in the presence of grace, to say 1,000 times interiorly, Thou art prepared to combat steadily, when, forsaken, no more is heard the sad and lamentable cry which you so often uttered. O God, why hast thou forsaken me? Rather do I hear the sweet words lovingly sounding in your ears. Come hither to me, my blessed ones. Possess the everlasting kingdom prepared for you from the beginning of the world. Where is now all the sorrow and affliction which ye ever endured on earth? O God, how swiftly it is all vanished like a dream, as though ye had never known tribulation. Of a truth, gentle Lord, how inscrutable are thy judgments to the world. Happy you, ye elect! It is all over now with going into corners, with stealing away and hiding yourselves from the senseless follies of other men. Oh, if all hearts were but one heart, they could not sufficiently reflect on the great honor, the immeasurable deserts, the praise which you will forevermore possess. O ye heavenly princes, O ye noble kings and emperors, O ye eternal children of God, how full of joy are your countenances, how full of gladness your hearts! What a loftiness of soul ye have! How right cheerfully do your voices swell forth in this song! Praise and thanksgiving, prosperity and benediction, grace and joy and everlasting honor to him, from world to world, from eternity to eternity, from the very bottom of our hearts, to him by whose goodness we possess all these things forever and ever. Amen. Lo, here is our fatherland. Here is heartfelt jubilation. Here is unfathomable everlasting life. The servant. O wonder above all wonders! O fathomless good, what art thou? Yes, my gentle Lord, my elected one, how good it is to be here! Only my love, let us tarry here. Eternal wisdom. It is not yet time to tarry here. Many a sharp conflict hast thou still to endure. This vision has only been shown to thee that thou mayest presently revert to it in all thy sufferings, as then thou canst never lose courage, and wilt forget all thy sorrow, and further, as an answer to the complaint of foolish men who say that I allow my friends to fare so hard. See then what a difference there is between my friendship and the friendship of this temporal state. And to speak according to the truth, how much better than others my friends fare at my hands. I will say nothing of the great trouble, labor, and many a severe tribulation which they swim and wade day and night. only this, that they are so blinded they do not understand it. It is indeed my eternal economy that a mind not regulated should be a sharp torment and a heavy burden to itself. My friends have bodily distress, but then they have peace of heart. The friends of the world hunt after bodily comfort and ease, but in their hearts, their souls and minds, they gain nothing but trouble and vexation. The servant. Those persons, Lord, are out of their right senses, and are raving, who would needs compare thy faithful friendship and the world's friendship together. What they should do so, because thou hast few friends who have no suffering to complain of, is the fault of their great blindness. O Lord, how very soft and gentle is thy fatherly rod! Blessed is he on whom thou sparest it not. Lord, I now plainly see that tribulation does not proceed from thy harshness, but rather from thy tender love. Let no one say for the future that thou hast forgotten thy friends, though those hast thou forgotten, for thou hast despaired of them, on whom thou dost spare chastisement here below. Lord, in all fairness, those ought not to have joyous days, nor pleasures, nor comfort here below, whom thou dost intend to shield above from eternal misery, and endow with everlasting delight. Grant, O Lord, that these two visions may never disappear from the eyes of my heart, so that I may never lose thy friendship. Chapter 13. On the immeasurable dignity of temporal suffering. The servant. Tell me now, tender Lord, what is this suffering in which thou thinkest so very profitable and good? Eternal wisdom. What I mean is every kind of suffering, whether willingly accepted or unwillingly incurred, as, when a man makes a virtue of necessity in not wishing to be exempt from suffering without my will, and ordering it, in humble patience, to my eternal praise. And the more willingly he does this, the more precious and agreeable it is to me. Touching such kinds of suffering, hear further, and write it down at the bottom of thy heart, and keep it as a sign to set before thy spiritual eyes of thy soul. My dwelling is in the pure soul as in a paradise of delights, for which reason I cannot endure that she should lovingly and longingly attach herself to anything. But, from her very nature, she is inclined to pernicious lusts, and therefore I encompass her paths with thorns. I garnish all her outlets with adversity, whether she likes it or not, so that she may not escape from me. Her ways I strew with tribulation, so that she may not set the foot of her heart's desire anywhere except in the loftiness of my divine nature. And if all hearts were but one heart, they would not be able to bear the smallest reward that I certainly will give for the smallest suffering endured by any one for love of me. Such is my eternal order in all nature, from which I do not swerve. What is precious and good must be earned with bitterness, and he who recoils at this, let him recoil. Many are indeed called, but few are chosen. The servant. It may well be, Lord, that suffering is an infinite good, provided it be not without measure, and not too dreadful and overwhelming. Lord, thou alone knowest all hidden things, and didst create all things in weight, in number and measure. Thou knowest also that my sufferings are measureless, that they are wholly beyond my strength. Lord, is there any one in all this world who has constantly more painful sufferings than I? They are to me invincible. How am I to endure them? Lord, if thou wouldst send me ordinary sufferings, I could bear them, but I do not see how I can ever endure such extraordinary sufferings as these, sufferings which in so hidden a manner oppress my heart and soul, which only thou canst perfectly understand. Eternal wisdom. Every sick man imagines that his own sickness is the worst, and every man in distress, his own distress the greatest. Had I sent thee other sufferings, it would have been the same. Conform thyself freely to my will under every suffering which I ordain thee to suffer, without accepting this or that other suffering. Dost thou not know that I only desire what is best for thee, even with as kindly a feeling as thou thyself? Hence it is that I am the eternal wisdom, and that I know better than thou what is for thy good. Hence it is that thou mayest have felt that the suffering to which I send are more exquisite, and penetrate deeper, and operate better, for him who does them justice, than all self-chosen sufferings. Why then dost thou complain to me? Address me rather as follows. O my most faithful Father, do to me at all times what thou wilt. The servant. O Lord, it is so easy to talk, but the reality is so difficult to endure, for it is so very painful. Eternal wisdom. If suffering gave no pain, it could not be called suffering. There is nothing more painful than suffering, and nothing more joyful than to have suffered. Suffering is a short pain and a long joy. Suffering gives to the sufferer pain here, and joy hereafter. Suffering kills suffering. Suffering is ordained that the sufferer may not suffer eternally. Hadst thou as much spiritual sweetness and divine consolation and heavenly delight as, at all times, to overflow with the divine dew, it would not be for thee so very meritorious of itself. Since, for all this together, I should not have to thank thee so much, it could not exculpate thee so much as an affectionate suffering of patience in adversity, in which thou sufferest for my sake. Sooner will 10 be perverted and ruined in the midst of great delight and joyous sweetness, than one in the midst of constant suffering and adversity. If thou hadst as much science as all the astronomers, if thou couldst discourse as ably of God as all the tongues of men and angels, and didst possess the treasures of knowledge of all the masters, not all this could avail to advance thee in a good life. So much as if thou didst give thyself up, and didst abandon thyself in all thy sufferings to God. For the former is common to the good and to the bad, but the latter is common to my elect alone. If anyone were able to rightly weigh time and eternity, he ought rather to desire to lie in a fiery furnace for 100 years than to be deprived in eternity of the smallest reward for the smallest suffering, and for this has an end, but the other is without end. The servant. Ah, sweet and dear Lord, how like a sweet harp are these words to a suffering mortal. Lord, Lord, wouldst thou but cheer me thus, and come to visit me in thy sufferings. I should be glad to suffer. It would then be better for me to suffer than not to suffer. Eternal Wisdom. Now, then, hearken to the sweet music of the distended strings of a God-suffering man. How richly it sounds, how sweetly it vibrates. Before the world, suffering is a reproach, but before me it is an infinite honor. Suffering is an extinguisher of my wrath, and an obtainer of my favor. Suffering makes a man in my sight worthy of love, for the sufferer is like me. Suffering is a hidden treasure which no one can make good, and though a man might kneel before me 100 years to beg a friendly suffering, he nevertheless would not earn it. Suffering changes an earthly man into a heavenly man. Suffering brings with it the estrangement of the world, but confers instead my intimate familiarity. It lessens delight and increases grace. He to whom I am to show myself a friend must be wholly disclaimed and abandoned by the world. Suffering is the surest way, the nearest way, and the shortest way. He who rightly knew how profitable suffering is ought to receive it as a gift worthy of God. Oh, how many a man there is who once was a child of eternal death, and plunged into the profoundest sleep, whom suffering has wakened up and encouraged to a good life. How many a wild beast, how many an untamed bird, there is in human form, whom constant suffering has shut up, as it were, in a cage, who, if any were to leave him time and place free, would do his best to escape from his salvation. Suffering is a safeguard against grievous falls. It makes a man know himself, rely on himself, and have faith in his neighbor. Suffering keeps the soul humble and teaches patience. It is the guardian of purity and confers the crown of eternal salvation. There is probably no man living but who derives good from suffering, whether he be in a state of sin, or on the eve of conversion, or in the fruition of grace, or on the summit of perfection. For it purges the soul as fire purges iron and purifies gold. It adorns the wrought jewel. Suffering takes away sin, lessens the fire of purgatory, expels temptation, consumes imperfections, and renovates the spirit. It imparts true confidence, a clear conscience, and a constant loftiness of mind. Know that it is a healthy beverage, and a wholesome herb above all the herbs of paradise. It chastises the body, which, at any rate, must not rot away, but it nourishes the noble soul, which shall endure forever. Behold, the noble soul blooms by suffering, even as the beautiful rose by the fresh dews of May. Suffering makes a wise mind and an experienced man. A man who has not suffered, what does he know? Suffering is affection's rod, a paternal blow given to my elect. Suffering draws and forces men to God, whether they like it or not. He who is always cheerful in suffering has for his servants joy and sorrow, friend and foe. How often hast thou not thrust an iron bit between the gnashing teeth of thy enemies, and rendered them, with thy joyous praise, and thy meekness in suffering powerless. Sooner would I create suffering out of nothing than leave my friends unprovided with it. For in suffering every virtue is preserved, man adorned, his neighbor reformed, and God praised. Patience in suffering is a living sacrifice. It is a sweet smell of balsam before my divine face. It is an appealing wonder before the entire host of heaven. Never was a skillful knight in a tournament so gazed at as a man who suffers well is gazed at by all the heavenly court. All the saints are on the side of the suffering man, for, indeed, they have all tried it before him, and they call out to him with one voice that it contains no poison, but is a wholesome beverage. Patience in suffering is superior to raising the dead, or the performing of other miracles. It is a narrow way which leads direct to the gates of heaven. Suffering makes us companions of the martyrs. It carries honor with it, and leads to victory against every foe. Suffering clothes the soul in garments of rose color, and in the brightness of purple. In suffering she wears the garland of red roses, and carries the scepter of green palms. Suffering is for her as a shining ruby in a young maiden's necklace. Adorned with it, she sings with a sweet voice and a free heart a new song, which not all the angelic choirs could ever sing, because they never knew suffering. And, to be short, those who suffer are called the poor before the world, but before me they are called the blessed, for they are my elect. The servant. Oh, how plainly does it appear that thou art the eternal wisdom, since thou canst bring the truth home with such cogency that no one doubts it any longer. No wonder that he, to whom thou dost make suffering appear so lovely, can bear sufferings. Lord, in consequence of thy words, all sufferings in future must be easier and full of joy for me. Lord, my true Father, behold, I kneel before thee this day, and praise thee fervently for my present sufferings, and also for the measureless sufferings past, which I deemed so very great, because they appeared so hostile to me. Eternal wisdom. But what is thy opinion now? The servant. Lord, in my opinion, in very truth is this, that when I look at thee, thou delight of my eyes, with looks of love, the great and violent sufferings with which, in so paternal a manner, thou hast disciplined me, and at the sight of which thy pious friends were filled with such terror on my account, have been like a sweet fall of dew in May. Now, when the same preacher had begun to write on suffering, there appeared to him, in a way already mentioned above, the same two persons that were in sorrow and trouble, sitting before him, and one of them requested him to play on the harp to her. This he took amiss, and answered that it would be an unpriestly thing. Then he was told that it would not be unpriestly, and presently there entered a youth who prepared a harp, and when he had tuned it, he spun the two threads crosswise over the strings, and gave it into the hands of the brother, and then the brother began to write on suffering. Chapter 14. On the unspeakable advantages to be derived from meditating on the divine passion. The servant. Truly, Lord, The unfathomable good which is found in thy passion for those who avail themselves of the time and place to meditate on it is a thing hidden from all hearts. Oh, what a sure path is the way of thy passion, along the way of truth, up to the very pinnacle of all perfection. All hail to thee, glorious St. Paul, thou noble light amongst all the stars of heaven, who was wrapped up so high and initiated so deeply into the mysteries of the Godhead, when thou didst hear the deep words, which it is not given to man to utter, and yet who was so sweetly touched in thy heart by this very passion of infinite love, and above everything else, that thou didst exclaim, I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ, and him crucified. Blessed be thou, too, among all doctors, sweet Saint Bernard, whose soul was so illuminated with the brightness of the eternal Word, that most sweetly did thy tongue exhale from a heart full the passion of his humility. When thy fervent soul thus spoke, the green bunch of myrrh of my Lord's bitter passion I fondly taken betwixt my breasts and tenderly pressed to my heart. I do not ask, like the bride, where he rests at noon, whom I embrace and where he rests at noon. I do not ask where he feeds his flock at noon, whom my soul so longingly beholds on the cross. That is certainly loftier, but this is sweeter and easier to attain. From this love's ever-flowing passion, I take what fully makes up for the insufficiency of my own small merits. Herein lies my complete justification. To meditate on this passion, I call eternal wisdom, the perfection of all knowledge, the riches of all salvation, an entire satisfaction of all desert. It casts me down in prosperity, it raises me up in adversity, it keeps me in an even balance between this world's weal and woe, and guards me against all evil in complete security. Sometimes I have drunk out of it a draught of salutary bitterness, but at the other times I have also drunk out of it a draught of spiritual consolation and divine sweetness. O sweet Saint Bernard, therefore is it but just that thy tongue should overflow with sweetness, since thy heart was so wholly sweetened with sweet suffering. O eternal wisdom, in this I observe that whoever is desirous of great reward and everlasting salvation, of high knowledge and deep wisdom, of standing erect in joy and sorrow, of possessing full security against all evil, whoever wishes to drink a draught of thy bitter passion and thy singular sweetness, must carry thee at all times, O crucified Jesus, before the eyes of his heart. Eternal wisdom, thou dost not rightly know what good is lodged in it. Behold, assiduous meditation on my passion makes out of a simple man a master of high knowledge. Truly it is a living book in which everything is to be found. How right blessed is that man who has it ever before his eyes and studies it. What wisdom, grace, consolation, sweetness, what cleansing from all imperfection may not such a man obtain through the devout contemplation of my living presence, respecting which, listen to what follows. It fell out of many years ago that a certain preacher in the beginning of his conversion had a bitter affliction of inordinate despondency, which at times so overpowered him that no heart which had not experienced it could conceive it. And, as he once sat after dinner in his cell, his affliction was so great that he could neither study nor pray, nor perform any other good deed, except sitting there so sadly in his cell, and laying his hands in his lap, as though he meant only to take care of the cell, for God's sake, because he was no longer of any use in spiritual things. And, as he thus sat disconsolate, it suddenly seemed to him as though he heard these words distinctly addressed to him: "Why dost thou sit here? Arise and betake thee to my sorrowful passion, for then wilt thou overcome thy own sorrow." And immediately he arose, for the words were the same to him as though they came from heaven, and he began to meditate on the sorrowful passion of the Lord, in which all his own sorrow was lost, so that he never felt it again in the same manner. The Servant. O my sweet wisdom, thou understandest all hearts, and knowest that, above all things, I desire to have my heart penetrated with thy passion, in the face of all men, and my eyes turned day and night into running fountains of bitter tears. Alas, there is just now in my soul a bitter complaint, that thy passion does not at all times thoroughly penetrate my heart, and that I do not meditate on it so affectionately as in reason I ought to do, and as is worthy of thee, my Lord elect. Teach me, therefore, how I ought to comport myself. Eternal Wisdom. The meditation on my torments must not be made by going through them in a hasty manner, when one has time and opportunity, but it must be made by going through them with heartfelt love and a compassionate searching into their mysteries, for otherwise the heart remains as unaffected by devotion as the mouth by unchewed, sweet-tasting food. If thou hast no liking to meditate on my passion with weeping eyes, because of the bitter agony I suffered, then thou oughtest to meditate on it with a laughing heart, because of the joyous benefit thou wilt find in it. But if thou hast no mind either to laugh or to cry, thou oughtest to meditate on it in the dryness of thy heart, to my honor and praise, by doing which thou wilt have done no less than if thou had been dissolved in tears or steeped in sweetness. For then thou actest from love to virtue, without regard to thyself. And that thou mayest take it all the more to heart, listen to what follows. Such is my severe justice that it permits no wrong deed in all nature, be it great or small, to pass without atonement and without being made good. Now, how should a great sinner who has perhaps committed more than 100 mortal sins, and for every mortal sin subjected himself by the law of my church to do penance 7 years long, or else to complete his unperformed penance in the furnace of grim purgatory, how should such a miserable soul fulfill her penance? When would there be an end to her sighs and tears? Oh, how long, how much too long, would it not appear to her? Behold, she has speedily made all good by means of my innocent meritorious passion. With reason, then, let her grasp the treasure of my acquired merits and apply it to herself, in virtue of which, even if she ought to burn 1,000 years in purgatory, she will be able in a short time to discharge her guilt and penance so as to attain heaven without any purgatory at all. The Servant. O tender and eternal wisdom, teach me this in thy goodness. How glad should I be to make such a grasp. Eternal wisdom. The way to make such a grasp is this. Let a man often and seriously weigh with a penitent heart the greatness and multitude of his evil deeds, by which he has so wantonly incensed the eyes of his heavenly Father. In the next place, let him account as nothing the works of his own satisfaction, since, reckoned against his sins, they are but as a little drop in the deep ocean, and then let him confidently weigh the immeasurable greatness of my satisfaction, for the least drop of my precious blood, which everywhere flowed without measure out of my body, would alone suffice to atone for the sins of 1,000 worlds. Every man, therefore, appropriates so much of my satisfaction to himself, in proportion as he assimilates himself to me by sympathetic participation in my sufferings. Moreover, let a man humbly and modestly merge the smallness of his works in the greatness of my satisfaction or atonement. And to tell it thee in a few words, know, then, that all the masters of numbers and measure wouldst be unable to calculate the immeasurable benefit which lies hidden in the zealous meditation of my passion.